Sunday lunch at Jake's family house on October 5th was supposed to be special. I had been feeling sick for weeks and finally took a pregnancy test that morning. 2 pink lines. I was nervous but excited to tell Jake's family our news, especially since this would be Patricia's first grandchild. I spent the morning making Jake's favorite dessert to bring along, trying to calm my nerves. We had been trying for a baby for almost a year, and I kept imagining how happy everyone would be. Jake was practically bouncing off the walls with excitement during the drive over. Patricia greeted us at the door with her usual dramatic flair. She hugged Jake first, then gave me one of those stiff hugs that felt more like an obligation. Her house always smelled like expensive candles, and she had classical music playing in the background like she was trying to prove how sophisticated she was. We sat down for lunch with Jake's sister Emma and her boyfriend. The conversation was normal at first, just catching up on work and weekend plans. I kept waiting for the right moment to share our news, but Patricia seemed distracted and kept checking her phone. About halfway through the meal, Patricia suddenly put down her fork and looked directly at Jake. She told him she needed to talk to us about something important. My stomach dropped because her tone was serious in a way that made me uncomfortable. She launched into this whole story about how her car was having problems and the repair costs were getting ridiculous. She said she had been looking at newer cars and found the perfect one, but she needed help with financing. Then she dropped the bomb that she needed $45,000 for this car loan. I nearly choked on my food. $45,000 wasn't pocket change for us. That was a significant chunk of our house down payment savings. Jake looked as shocked as I felt, but he tried to stay diplomatic and asked her about other financing options. Patricia got defensive immediately. She started talking about how banks were being unreasonable with their requirements and how family should help family. She said she had already looked into everything else and this was her only option. The way she presented it made it sound like we were her last resort, but also like she expected us to just say yes. I could feel the tension building at the table. Emma looked uncomfortable and kept glancing between her mom and us. I tried to stay calm and suggested that maybe we could help her find a less expensive car, or look into other loan options together. That's when Patricia's mask completely slipped. She told me I didn't understand her situation, and that she deserved to have nice things after everything she had been through. She said the car wasn't just transportation. It was about maintaining her dignity and social status in the community. I realized this wasn't really a request, it was a demand disguised as a favor. She had already decided we were going to give her the money, and our hesitation was clearly frustrating her. Jake tried to mediate by saying we needed time to think about it and discuss our finances. Patricia's face turned red and she started raising her voice. She told Jake that a good son would want to help his mother, and that I was obviously the one preventing him from doing the right thing. She said I was being selfish and controlling, and that maybe I didn't understand what it meant to be part of their family. I felt my pregnancy hormones kicking in, but I tried to stay calm. I told her we weren't saying no permanently, just that we needed to be responsible about such a large financial commitment. That's when she completely lost it. She stood up from the table and started screaming that I was unworthy of the family name. She said I was a gold digger who was trying to keep Jake from helping his own mother. She accused me of being manipulative and said she had never liked me, but had tried to be polite for Jake's sake. The whole room went silent except for her yelling. Emma looked mortified, and Jake's face went completely white. I was so shocked I couldn't even respond. Here I was, pregnant with her first grandchild, being screamed at for not immediately agreeing to give her $45,000. Jake finally found his voice and told his mother to stop. He said she was being completely inappropriate and that she owed me an apology. Patricia turned on him then, saying he had changed since he married me, and that I had turned him against his own family. We left immediately after that. I was shaking in the car, and Jake kept apologizing and saying he couldn't believe his mother had acted that way. We never did get to share our pregnancy news that day. Instead of celebrating, we drove home in stunned silence, both trying to process what had just happened. That evening at home, Jake and I sat at our kitchen table trying to make sense of the disaster at lunch. I was still feeling shaky from the confrontation, and Jake looked completely defeated. He kept running his hands through his hair and apologizing for his mother's behavior. I told him he didn't need to apologize for her actions, but I was concerned about the pattern I was starting to see. The way Patricia had presented the car loan demand felt calculated, like she had been planning it for a while. I asked Jake when was the last time his mother had actually paid us back for any of the money we had loaned her over the years. Jake got quiet and started thinking. We began going through our memories of all the times Patricia had asked for financial help. There was the time she needed money for home repairs after a storm, the emergency dental work that her insurance supposedly didn't cover, the property tax payment she claimed had been miscalculated by the county, multiple car repairs and maintenance issues over the past few years. As we talked, I realized we had never actually kept proper records of these loans. We had been treating them like family favors rather than serious financial transactions. Patricia always made her requests sound urgent and temporary, promising to pay us back as soon as her next Social Security check came in, or when she resolved whatever bureaucratic issue was supposedly holding up her money. I suggested we go through our bank statements to try to figure out exactly how much money we had given her over the years. Jake was reluctant at first because it felt like we were investigating his own mother, but I pointed out that we needed to understand the full scope of the situation before we could make any decisions about future loans. We spent the next 2 hours going through our online banking records. Every time we found a transfer or check written to Patricia, I wrote it down on a piece of paper. The amounts started small in the early years of our marriage, but they had been getting progressively larger and more frequent. The first loan we could find was for $800 about 3 years ago for what she called a plumbing emergency. Then there was $1,500 for the dental work, $2,000 for the home repairs, multiple smaller amounts for various car issues, a big one for $3,500 when she said she was behind on her mortgage payment. By the time we finished going through everything, I had filled up 2 pages with entries. Jake looked sick as we added up the total. We had loaned his mother over $30,000 in the past 3 years alone, and she had never repaid a single penny of it. I asked Jake if he remembered his mother ever actually paying us back for anything, and he admitted he couldn't think of a single instance. Every time we had asked about repayment, she had some new excuse or crisis that prevented her from following through on her promises. The worst part was realizing how the pattern had escalated. The requests had started small and reasonable, but once she realized we would say yes, the amounts kept getting bigger. The car loan demand for $45,000 wasn't just entitled. It was the natural progression of years of successful financial manipulation. Jake was devastated. He said he felt stupid for not seeing it sooner, and he was angry at himself for letting his mother take advantage of us. I tried to be supportive, but I was also feeling pretty manipulated myself. I had trusted Patricia because she was family, and she had been systematically draining our savings while we worked our asses off trying to build a future together. We talked about confronting her, but Jake wasn't sure how to approach it. Part of him still wanted to believe that his mother had genuinely intended to pay us back, and had just fallen on hard times. But the evidence was pretty clear that this had become a pattern of exploitation rather than temporary assistance. I told Jake we needed to get a complete picture of our financial relationship with his mother before we decided how to handle the situation. The $30,000 we had found was just from our current bank account, but we had been married for 4 years and had previous accounts that might show additional loans. That night, I lay awake thinking about how Patricia's behavior at lunch made so much more sense now. She hadn't been asking for help, she had been demanding her next payment from what she apparently saw as her personal ATM. When we hesitated, she had gotten angry because we were disrupting her established system of financial extraction. The next morning, I called in sick to work because I couldn't focus on anything except getting to the bottom of Patricia's financial manipulation. Jake and I drove to our bank first thing when they opened, requesting copies of all our account statements going back 5 years to when we first got married. The bank representative was helpful but curious about why we needed such extensive records. I told her we were reviewing some family loans and needed to get organized for tax purposes. She printed everything out for us, and we left with a thick stack of papers that represented our entire financial history as a couple. We decided to go through the records at a coffee shop rather than at home, somehow feeling like we needed neutral territory for this investigation. I felt guilty about what we were doing, like we were betraying family trust, but I also knew we had to understand the full extent of the situation. Jake spread the statements out chronologically, and we started from the beginning of our marriage. The first year showed only a few small transactions to Patricia, maybe a couple $100 total for what looked like genuine emergencies. But by the second year, the pattern was already becoming established. I created a spreadsheet on my laptop to track everything systematically. Date, amount, stated reason for the loan, whether it was ever repaid. The stated reasons column filled up with increasingly creative explanations. Medical emergencies, home repairs, car troubles, tax problems, insurance issues, utility shutoffs, legal fees for some property dispute that never seemed to get resolved. What struck me most was how the amounts had grown over time, but also how the frequency had increased. In our first year of marriage, Patricia had asked for money maybe 3 times. By our 4th year, she was asking almost monthly. Sometimes she would ask Jake directly, other times she would call me when she knew he was at work. Jake found a pattern I hadn't noticed. Many of the larger loans had been requested right after we had mentioned some financial milestone or purchase. When we bought new furniture for our apartment, suddenly Patricia needed money for home repairs. When Jake got a promotion at work, she had a medical emergency that required immediate payment. By lunchtime, we had gone through 3 years of records and the total was already approaching $50,000. Jake looked physically ill. He kept saying he couldn't believe he had been so blind to what was happening. I reminded him that Patricia was his mother and he had trusted her, which was natural and not something he should feel guilty about. The afternoon brought even worse discoveries. We found several large transfers that Jake didn't even remember making. When I asked him about a $4,000 payment from 2 years ago, he had to think for several minutes before recalling that Patricia had called him crying about some crisis while he was at work. She had been so upset that he had just transferred the money immediately without really processing the amount. That's when I realized Patricia had been strategically timing her requests for maximum emotional impact. She would call during stressful times at work, or when one of us was dealing with our own problems, making it harder for us to think clearly about the financial implications. The final tally was devastating. Over 5 years of marriage, we had given Patricia $75,000 in loans that had never been repaid. Not a single penny had ever come back to us, despite her constant promises and reassurances that repayment was just around the corner. I felt sick thinking about what that money could have meant for our future. We could have bought a house already. We could have invested in retirement accounts or saved for our children's education. Instead, we had been unknowingly funding Patricia's lifestyle while sacrificing our own financial security. Jake was quiet for a long time after we finished calculating the total. Finally, he said he felt like he didn't even know his mother anymore. The person who had raised him wouldn't have systematically stolen from her own son and daughter-in-law. But the evidence was undeniable. I suggested we needed to confront Patricia with these findings, but Jake wasn't ready for that conversation yet. He needed time to process the betrayal and figure out how to handle the situation. We agreed to take a few days to think about our next steps, but we both knew that the $45,000 car loan demand was absolutely not happening. That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about how Patricia had screamed that I was unworthy of the family name. The irony was overwhelming. She had been stealing from us for years, but somehow I was the unworthy one for not immediately agreeing to give her even more money. 1 week after our bank investigation, Jake finally worked up the courage to arrange a family dinner to confront his mother about the loans. We invited Emma too because Jake felt like she deserved to know what had been happening, and he wanted witnesses to the conversation. Patricia seemed pleased that we were initiating family time, probably thinking we had come around to her way of thinking about the car loan. She made a big show of cooking Jake's favorite meal and setting the table with her good china. She kept making comments about how nice it was when family could work together to solve problems. I brought copies of our bank records in a folder, but I kept them in my purse until we were ready to present them. Jake had practiced what he wanted to say, but I could tell he was nervous about confronting his mother directly. Emma arrived looking confused about why we had called this sudden family meeting. We made it through dinner with normal conversation, though Patricia kept making subtle references to her car situation. She mentioned how embarrassing it was to drive her current car to social events, and how she had been telling her friends about the new car she was planning to get. She was clearly trying to create social pressure by making it seem like the loan was already a done deal. After dinner, Jake took a deep breath and told his mother we needed to discuss her financial requests more seriously. He said we had been reviewing our budget and realized we needed to be more careful about large expenditures. Patricia's face immediately changed, and she started getting defensive about being questioned. She launched into the same arguments from the previous week about family helping family. and how she had sacrificed so much for Jake when he was growing up. She said she wasn't asking for charity, just temporary help until she could get back on her feet financially. She promised the car loan would be different from previous assistance because she would set up a formal repayment plan. That's when I pulled out the folder with our bank records. I told Patricia we had gone through our finances carefully and discovered some concerning patterns. Jake's hands were shaking as he started reading from the list of loans we had compiled over the past 5 years. Patricia's face went white as Jake read through the dates and amounts. $75,000 total, with not a single payment ever made toward repayment. Emma's mouth fell open as she heard the numbers. She had no idea her mother had been borrowing such large amounts from us. Patricia immediately went into victim mode. She started crying and saying we were making her sound like a criminal when she had just been trying to survive after her husband's death. She said we were being cruel and heartless by keeping such detailed records of family help. She accused us of treating her like a business transaction instead of family. I stayed calm and pointed out that the issue wasn't the individual loans, but the pattern of promising repayment and never following through. I asked her directly when she had ever paid us back for any of the money we had loaned her over the years. She couldn't give a specific example, but she insisted she had always intended to repay everything. Emma finally spoke up and asked her mother why she hadn't mentioned these loans to her. Patricia got defensive and said it wasn't Emma's business, and that Jake was the one with a good job who could afford to help. Emma pointed out that $75,000 was a massive amount of money for anyone to loan, and she was shocked that Patricia had been asking for such large sums. Jake found his voice and told his mother he felt betrayed and manipulated. He said the pattern showed deliberate financial exploitation, not genuine emergencies. He pointed out how the amounts had grown larger over time, and how she had timed her requests for maximum emotional impact. Patricia got angry then and accused me of turning Jake against her. She said I was the one who had calculated all these numbers and made everything sound worse than it was. She claimed I was trying to destroy their family relationship because I was jealous of her bond with Jake. I had been prepared for this accusation. I pulled out additional bank records showing Patricia's own spending patterns that I had researched. While she was claiming poverty and emergency situations to us, her social media posts showed expensive dinners, new clothes, and luxury purchases. She had been living well beyond her means while using our money to supplement her lifestyle. The evidence was overwhelming. Restaurant receipts, shopping purchases, spa treatments, vacation expenses. All while she was telling us she could barely afford basic necessities. Emma looked horrified as she saw the documentation of her mother's actual spending habits compared to her claims of financial hardship. Patricia realized she was cornered and switched tactics again. She started screaming that we had no right to investigate her personal finances, and that we were violating her privacy. She said children owed their parents support, and that she deserved to enjoy her life after working hard for so many years. Jake told his mother that the car loan request was absolutely denied, and that there would be no more financial assistance until she repaid at least some of what she already owed us. Patricia threatened to cut contact with us entirely if we didn't help her with the car. She said we would regret treating her this way, and that she would make sure everyone knew how selfish and ungrateful we were. We left that night knowing the relationship was fundamentally changed. Emma hugged us both and apologized for her mother's behavior. She said she had suspected something was wrong, but had never imagined the extent of the financial manipulation. 1 month later, Patricia made good on her threat to escalate the situation. She had been calling and texting both Jake and me constantly, alternating between guilt trips and angry demands. When we didn't respond to her car loan ultimatum, she told us she was consulting a lawyer about forcing us to give her the money she needed. Jake was devastated by his mother's threats, but I was honestly relieved that she was showing her true colors so clearly. I suggested we consult our own attorney to understand our rights and protect ourselves from whatever Patricia might try to do legally. Our lawyer, David Martinez, was recommended by a colleague at the hospital who had dealt with family financial disputes before. When we explained the situation, he immediately understood the seriousness of what we were dealing with. He said financial exploitation by family members was more common than people realized, and that Patricia's threats suggested she might escalate to more serious harassment. David reviewed all our documentation and was impressed by how thorough our records were. He said the bank statements clearly showed a pattern of financial abuse, and that Patricia's failure to repay any of the loans could potentially be considered fraud if she had never intended to honor her repayment promises. The most helpful thing David did was explain our legal position. Patricia had no right to demand money from us, regardless of family relationships. Her threats to sue us for the car loan were completely baseless, and any actual lawsuit would likely expose her own financial misconduct to legal scrutiny. David suggested we consider sending Patricia a formal cease and desist letter demanding that she stop contacting us about money and stop making threats. He also recommended that we document any future harassment in case we needed to pursue a restraining order later. What we hadn't expected was that David had been recording our conversations with Patricia when she called his office directly. Apparently, she had somehow gotten his contact information and had been calling him multiple times, trying to convince him that we owed her money and that he should advise us to pay for her car. During these recorded calls, Patricia had made several statements that were legally problematic for her. She had admitted that she had never intended to repay the previous loans because she felt Jake owed her for raising him. She had also made threats about destroying our reputations in the community if we didn't give her the car money. Most damaging was her admission that she had been exaggerating or fabricating some of the emergencies she had used to justify the loans. She told David that sometimes she had needed money for other things but knew we would only help if she made the situation sound urgent and desperate. David played us the recordings, and I felt sick hearing Patricia's voice admitting to manipulating us for years. Jake looked like he was going to throw up. His mother had been lying to us systematically, creating fake emergencies to extract money while living beyond her means with our financial support. The recordings also captured Patricia making threats about what she would do if we didn't comply with her demands. She had talked about contacting our employers, spreading rumors in our neighborhood, and making our lives miserable until we gave her what she wanted. These threats moved her behavior into potential criminal territory. David advised us to cut off all contact with Patricia immediately and to document any attempt she made to contact us going forward. He prepared a formal legal letter informing her that any further harassment would result in legal action, and that her admissions about the fraudulent loan requests had been recorded and could be used against her if necessary. We also discussed the possibility of pursuing legal action to recover some of the money Patricia had taken from us. David said we had a strong case for fraud and financial abuse, but he warned us that family court battles were expensive and emotionally draining. We would need to decide if recovering the money was worth the additional stress and family destruction. Jake was torn between wanting justice and wanting to just move on with our lives. I was leaning toward taking legal action because I felt like Patricia needed to face consequences for her behavior. But we agreed to take some time to think about it before making any final decisions. The meeting with David was eye-opening in terms of understanding how serious Patricia's behavior had become. What had started as family financial assistance had evolved into systematic exploitation and was now moving toward criminal harassment. We realized we needed to protect ourselves legally and emotionally from further manipulation. Epilogue *. It's been 6 months since we cut contact with Patricia, and honestly, our lives have been so much more peaceful. We never did pursue legal action to recover the $75,000 because we decided our mental health was worth more than the money. Jake struggled with guilt for a while, but he's come to understand that protecting our family was the right choice. Our baby is due in 3 months, and we've been able to focus on preparing for parenthood without the constant drama and financial stress that Patricia brought into our lives. We used the money we would have spent on her car loan as a down payment on a house instead, which feels like the right priority for our growing family. Emma has maintained a relationship with her mother, but she's been much more careful about Patricia's financial requests. She told us that Patricia eventually bought a used car with her own money, proving that she never actually needed our $45,000 in the first place. The whole crisis had been manufactured to manipulate us into giving her money for something she wanted rather than needed. Jake still gets sad sometimes about losing his relationship with his mother, but he's also relieved not to be constantly worried about the next financial emergency or guilt trip. We've learned to recognize manipulation tactics and set firm boundaries with family members who try to take advantage of our generosity. The pregnancy announcement that got overshadowed by Patricia's car loan demand finally happened properly when we told Emma and Jake's extend.